All right, hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy 59 with Steph Gooch, Senior Optimization Architect. Sorry about the little mix-up on the LinkedIn event. I'm going to post the link now that we are live on our new event. We accidentally changed the event, so let me post that live, and then we can all. I'm posting that on the old one. So once
Cool.
here.
It wouldn't be a live stream if it weren't for certain events like this. But while Stephen is doing that, Steph, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We are live from New York at the AWS Summit over here.
Yeah.
And it is really exciting. I was actually hoping that we'd do this in person over here, but you're back in London, isn't it?
Yeah. If I was there, I'd be in the room with you guys because it's always way more fun. But yeah, I'm based in London, so it's coming up to the end of my day here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about how the summit goes. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great events and talks and fun things going on.
That's awesome. So why don't I just kick it off with a simple question? You obviously don't need much of an introduction, but for the folks who are new to AWS and new to the world of cloud cost optimization, and specifically with AWS, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came into AWS and cost optimization specifically?
Yeah, sure. So I'll go with what I do now. So I work at AWS, as said, and I'm a senior optimization architect, solution architect. And my job is to help large customers optimize their spend or be more proactive with their cloud financial management, or FinOps, depending on your terminology. But yeah, so I'm a resource that just gets help telco customers just kind of cover their optimization journeys, their strategy, their chargeback, showback best practices. And I'm really lucky that I get to speak to a bunch of different customers and help them with their journey. And then alongside that, I do a lot of streaming. So I have a Twitch show on the AWS Twitch channel called The Keys to AWS Optimization, where I get guests on different customers, different SMEs in the AWS world, and they kind of share their stories about how to optimize. So this season 7 we're doing all about optimization. So hopefully on Thursday, we're doing actually a deep dive into code build optimization, which is a random service that you're like, you need to optimize, but yeah.
Right.
So that's what I do.
All right, sorry about that. I'm tuning back in. Got the message
you're
on
good,
the
you're
event
good.
to join into this one. So now hopefully people migrate over. No, I can see the count clicking upwards. It looks like people got the message. Steph, thank you so much for joining us. So we'd ask a question that we ask of any kind of cost. So as a cost optimization or an optimization architect, why does AWS want to help people save money? Aren't they trying to do the other thing? Isn't that their businesses trying to get money from people?
Seems counterintuitive to a lot of folks who are new to this.
Yeah, so I'll focus in on one of our kind of best set of principles, which is customer obsession. So we love working with customers and we want them to succeed in their cloud development. And so being cost optimized is part of that. And it's the same as it's part of the well-architected framework. So when you do your SA exams, it's one of the kind of brackets of information you need to know about. And so it's a big part of being on the cloud is being more cost optimized and making sure you're efficient in the cloud. And so we want to make sure that customers are successful, because in the long term, when they're successful, we're successful. So we invest time and money and resources into helping them develop so that then they grow and they become more efficient. They grow more in the cloud. They need more resources. They need to support their customer base. They will continue to work with AWS and continue with their journey. So yeah, the summary is when they win, I win. So it's always good.
Yeah, I actually love that about AWS. And I think that particular leadership principle is evident in every interaction I've had with AWS over the last 15 years. So tell us a little bit about the kind of support that your team gets to customers when they want to optimize their costs.
Yeah, so I work in a team called Optics specifically, and we're aligned to like a subset of customers, like I said. And my job, there's kind of there's now 3 different roles in the team, but there's my role, which is more about the architecture and optimization, the high level, but also going in more of the strategic and optimization view. So we'll do a kind of combination of, at the moment, a lot of my customers are looking at developing their FinOps teams and figuring out who do I need to hire, like What do I need to educate people on? What are the best practices that other people are doing? How do I see my costs? How do I evaluate where I should help people optimize? So there's all those kind of questions that we help with. And then there's also the actual optimization work, which is obviously a big part of FinOps. So what we'll do is kind of deep dives into their services. I was actually in Singapore last week helping with a colleague of mine's customer, which was great. And we did like a bit of a deep dive on things like CloudWatch optimization, which is always one of those services that people forget about, and they always focus on RDS and EC2. And I'm like, no, let's go for CloudWatch because that's way more interesting. So we'll do that kind of deep dive optimization as well.
That sounds awesome. So you mentioned about CloudWatch being the last one that you went to, but what are generally your go-to optimizations? Like, is there a stack ranking of the ones you kind of go down?
Yeah, so I was actually controversially saying this recently, which is I don't like to do EC2 optimizations as my first thing, which I feel like some people are going to be like, what? Because EC2 is always the biggest spender. It is always the biggest spender, which makes it one of the hardest ones to target. So I feel like I love a bit of a kind of hybrid approach of doing some low-hanging fruit alongside doing some strategic elements as well. So I'm always that person who's going to be like, oh, how much are you wasting on elastic IPs? Elastic IPs are one of the smallest ways to optimize, but I think it's a really good indicator of highlighting what accounts might be not focused on their utilization, what accounts might be manually making stuff, where there might be bugs, and using that as an entry point that it's a really kind of simple way to save money. It's a small amount of money, but it gets people kind of completing tasks quickly and having success immediately, rather than trying to boil the ocean and be like, we're spending $1 million a month on EC2. How do I save money on that? When that's a complicated approach. And I think sometimes with the world of FinOps and engineers, sometimes we think as a FinOps person, oh, you just right size, like it's just, you just make it smaller. It's that's easy, right? When in fact, there's a lot of thinking and processes and testing that needs to be done on these things. And so you should have that bubbling away. There should be education around choosing the right instance types and making sure that you're assessing whether you're using the amount you need in combination with auto scaling, spot usage, like savings plans, all this other stuff that kind of goes into the EC2 bubble. But at the same time, you could be cleaning up your kind of idle resources and making sure that nothing is created manually, making sure that when you were creating stuff using infrastructure as code, you have the kind of simple things changed in your defaults, like GP2 to GP3 and Graviton for managed services. I realize I've just run off a bunch of different things. So if you want me to go into any of those, clearly this is the first stream I've done in a bit off for so many weeks. I need to get back into my stream mode. But yeah.
Not at all. I think the point that you mentioned about EC2 is very, very apt. And, I think we need to dig into that just a little bit more. The biggest number that shows up on any of these charts seems to cause people to gravitate towards it. And that becomes the one thing that everyone tries to solve, because it seems like the biggest bang for the buck. But it is one of the hardest things to do, because I actually, with all my experience trying to do EC2 right sizing, it is a multi-dimensional problem. I mean, at first you have to look at CPU utilization, you have to look at memory utilization, you have to look at disk IO, you have to look at memory IO, network IO. And then on top of that, you've got architecture and you've got the work that people have to do to actually make that stuff happen. So there's disruption as well, because there is an instance restart that has to happen. You have to make sure that everything comes back up, perfectly when everything is, turned off, or that you do a restart. There's state that might be in memory. There's so many variables that most engineers actually don't know what's going on inside those machines, and just blanket doing a right sizing doesn't really work. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to emphasize that get the low-hanging fruit. I think I'd go back to the FinOps crawl, walk, run mechanism. Go get the low-hanging fruit first, because it also kind of gives you that impetus to continue doing more. If you just start with EC2 right sizing, it feels like one of Sisyphus's exercises trying to push this big rock up the hill, and you might not get to the end of it in any reasonable amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that you mentioned elastic IP addresses and unused elastic IP addresses. I'm just posting a link in the comments. We have a blog post about how to remove unused Elastic IP addresses. And like you said, you can go into EC2 and look at this multi-dimensional optimization problem, but you might be hanging on to several $1,000s worth of numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
A set of numbers. And one of the funny things about Elastic IP addresses is that you can look up, are they associated or not, but you can't tell how long they've been unassociated. So you have to look at it, once a day or once every couple of hours for a month or however long your threshold is to determine, is this actually unused?
Yeah, and this is where things like Trusted Advisor help, and the Trusted Advisor dashboard. So I don't know if you guys have spoken much about the cloud intelligence dashboards. There's a Trusted Advisor dashboard, which pulls in Trusted Advisor data and then collects it regularly. I think it's bi-weekly, and then presents it in a nice quick site dashboard. And what that allows you to do is like track those checks over time. And things like the cost ones are great because you're right, that it could be unattached just because something is happening and then it's just being unattached briefly. And if you delete it, then you're going to mess everything up. Whereas having that data and that look back allows you to review and assess and say, okay, this has been unattached for a year, a month, 2 months. What account does it belong to? Who owns it? Do we know how it was deployed? Are you using infrastructure as code? Has someone done it manually by accident in a sandbox account? And just to clarify, because I remember working this out when I was really early in my FinOps career, and I was seeing all this cost optimization stuff. And I think Elastic IPs, unless they've changed, cost 0.005 cents an hour to be unattached, right? Which is nothing. Right. Which, if you have it unattached for an entire month, is $3.36, right? So
I think
we're not
talking $5. Yeah.
Yeah. And in America, that's not enough for a coffee from places that I've been anyway, like Starbucks. You can't buy a proper coffee for that. So you're thinking, well, that's not that much. Why am I wasting my time? But if you have 100 accounts, well, then that goes up to $300 a month. And if you have that for 3 months, that's going up to almost $1,000. And it's that cumulative spend that can happen that you can waste a lot of money on. And kind of, like I said, figuring out why that's the big question in this stuff people forget about, why was it unattached? Not that it is, but why, and what can I put in place to prevent that happening again? Will kind of set you up for success.
Correct. I think one of the most common issues that we've seen with Elastic IPs in particular is the fact that a lot of developers would stand up, ever since VPCs became the default for EC2 instances to be launched, they would stand up these other EC2 instances and attach public IP addresses or Elastic IP addresses to them to act as a jump box to access whatever else they needed. And when they just terminated those instances, those Elastic IPs would just lie around. So I think one of the biggest learnings that I've had is that these were just created as ad hoc instances that people wanted to launch to act as jump boxes. And, they just left those Elastic IPs, even though they terminated the EC2 instance, the Elastic IPs tend to linger around unless you explicitly release them.
Yeah, it's that manual stuff.
It's really rare that it's part of the CloudFormation template, right? It's something that was done after the fact in the console in a hurry. And that's why also you need the automation, because it's going to keep happening, right? There's no amount of rules that you can put on your developers that's going to stop this from happening.
And for those who haven't checked this out, there have been some recent releases where SSH access into your instances have been made way simpler with the new console abilities, and also the AWS CLI has a new mechanism of SSHing in without needing either instances or public IPs. There are better mechanisms.
Oh, I need to have a look. Yeah,
I think this from 3 weeks ago. 3 or 4 weeks ago, there's a new AWS announcement.
Fairly recent.
Yeah, it's fairly recent.
Cool. Yeah, guys, you need to share that with me after, because that's, when I think back to when I was an engineer, and it was we built in a Bastion or jump box, whatever you want to call it, as part of the infrastructure that was default in our build.
Right.
But one thing I got on my soapbox about was that this jump box was on 24/7 in dev accounts, and it was in every one of our accounts. It was like that. And it was one day I was like, oh my God, there's so much money wasted on just these, not even the applications. It was just these jump boxes. And so I wrote something that was, the concept was that you would, kind of like instant scheduler, at night it would turn off any jump boxes, and then they wouldn't turn back on unless somebody hit a URL, and that would turn it on. So developers wouldn't have to worry about having to turn it off, and they could just turn it on by just a simple URL that they would just hit. So thinking about those kind of wastes is really important. But yeah, the fact that it's replaced, I need to go and dive into some of my customers and be like, hey guys, there's this thing.
multiple ways to do it. You can use SSM, agents to basically connect into those boxes. But I think the last release, I don't know whether we found it and put it up, but we will put it up on this as a separate comment. But yeah, that problem should actually go away now. Hopefully people will start adopting the newer mechanisms of accessing those machines instead of using elastic IPs as on bastions or jump boxes. Awesome.
Yeah.
So Steph, you spoke about some of the short-term easy wins. Tell us a little bit about the long-term refactoring and re-architecting kind of exercises that you go through with your customers. What does it typically involve? Like, I assume that these are big monolithic applications that move to AWS, and you're trying to, turn them into cloud native services. What does a typical re-architecture look like? Or what are the say 4 or 5 things that you go through while determining what should be refactored or re-architected?
Yeah, especially with the lift and shift, and we see a lot of this like out of the box recommended instance types as part of the to kind of start that off. So an application gets moved from on-prem to the cloud, and they've got an off-the-shelf application they're putting on this box, and there's probably a recommended size by this company, and they say, oh, you should choose this one. That's the one that will always work. That's fine. And that's always a good recommendation to start with, but they don't know how much usage the application is getting. So that's what I think of that as more as a starting point. And then it's up to engineers and application owners to review that and say, well, we actually need a bigger box or we need a smaller box. Let's change that and start to make it more cloud efficient. And then start to say, okay, when we set this up the first time, we manually installed this application. Is it feasible that we could automate this? Like, can we move this off to like SSM, like you mentioned, already user data? Can we make this as an auto-scaling situation? And then once you get that, that's where you can start to integrate things like Spot. If possible, can I auto-scale up, have my bulk of my instances as savings plan covered, so you kind of get optimized for that kind of flat line of usage. And then these spikes, can we use things like auto-scaling groups? And a big part is more, especially around EC2, it's not just about the choosing that you need to like resize and things like that. It's more about thinking about how you can automate a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And again, I bring up the engineer / FinOps kind of needs to be more of a connection on this, because that's a long-term process, but that is application specific. When I was talking to a customer recently, I remember telling a story. When I was an engineer, I had to set up an application. I won't shame it, because it was I might have changed by now, but it was application, and I had to manually install it. I had to literally log in to like a Windows box and click through the process and install this thing. And I had to use one of the biggest at the time instance types, because we couldn't have the risk that it would fail. It couldn't fall over. Right. And for twofold, that like if it fell down, it meant that other people's applications would be, and data would be lost or something. And then also I would have to manually go in and set up again, which took like an hour. So we had to go for the biggest instance type. And every single time I looked at like Trusted Advisor, Compute Optimizer wasn't a thing back then, it would say, your box is too big, your box is too big. And if I had at that time some FinOps person come at me every week and be like, Steph, your FinOps this is too big, like you're wasting all this money, I would have been like, you try and set up this application. And I would have been really annoyed about it. But now, like after having that experience, then being on this side of it after the last kind of 5 years, you have to remember that and take into the consideration that sometimes things aren't meant to be on the cloud yet. They're not set up for that. And that's where you ask the question, is this application worth it? And I think that could be a really like, whoa, maybe that's too far. But there's something to think about, like, is this application the right one that you need for the cloud? Is there something better that you could move to? That is obviously like a lot further out of the realm of what I deal with, because it goes into the application teams and the engineering teams. But yeah, it's always those like why questions I think are really important. But going back to your original question, like moving to the cloud, I think a lot of the stuff, like I said, looking at where you can automate, where you can auto scale, where you can take advantage of cloud native services such as Lambda. Like if you are just running a script on an EC2, use a Lambda. Like don't spin up a whole box. And it's things like that we're kind of looking towards more mode customers and trying to dive deep, especially in this new. So my solution architecture role is new. And so we're trying to go down that avenue more and looking forward to kind of diving into these kind of topics with customers.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. In my experience, I found that getting the old legacy applications to be stateless so that you can actually leverage auto-scaling groups and other such mechanisms which assume that when you start up an instance, it just takes over and you can load balance appropriately across an ASG. Those invariably with large enterprise applications become really hard. Because these monolithic applications just assume that there'd be some jar file with a cache in memory, that they just assumed a certain architecture. They never, went in with the assumption that everything is going to be distributed by any means. So that's been a big challenge. Have you come across that in general, or have the applications that you've come across been relatively straightforward to translate over to stateless setups?
So I haven't seen it that much. Like I said, it's something that's newer. We're trying to dive more into with customers on it. But I think especially the work I did in Singapore last week was having these conversations with more of the with kind of having, like you said, pushing the fact that it's not necessarily that people need to optimize their infrastructure, so they need to optimize the application, and starting to push the FinOps teams to have those conversations. My job in optics is there is to a certain point that we can work with the customers, but a lot of the time we're trying to teach them to have those conversations without us. I'm always trying to make my job irrelevant. Like, my goal is to help a customer to a point, and then they can kind of do it themselves, which is one of my favorite things when they're like, okay, yeah, we got it. And I was like, okay, just call me if you need me. But they're trying to push them to have those conversations. But yeah, I think things are now, especially because the world of FinOps has been progressing more and more over the last couple of years, we are moving away from this, okay, we need to delete stuff mindset, to how do we actually review what we've built and make it more cloud efficient.
Makes complete sense. Let's talk a little bit about the customers and the roadblocks that you see in trying to implement a lot of these cost-saving measures. Like, what are the challenges that you experience or come across?
And you mentioned a really good point, that it's not necessarily technical, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, it's never technical. It's people. It's always, and if any engineers are watching, there's no hate to you. Like, there was, I love engineers. Used to be one. I feel like I could diss us, but it's always the culture, and I think that is where people sometimes focus on the numerical, like, I need to delete this, or I need to optimize this one thing. And the biggest impact you can have is establishing this cost-aware culture. There are different kind of ways. Maybe we could dive into some of those ways of doing it. But the roadblocks that we see are people saying, like, oh, I'm trying to get these people to optimize, and they're just not listening to me. And the problem is with FinOps teams is they are trying to do this, like, they're trying to fight this battle with everybody, and they're not working with their engineering teams to do that. And it's often because engineers have a lot on their plate. They are building out this entire infrastructure. They're installing these applications. They're making it highly available. They're dealing with patches. They're dealing with security. They have a lot on. And so if you're poking them and saying, oh, your instance is too big, and you're doing it outside of that realm, you're doing it somewhere over here that's, like, not in their scope of what they think their job is, no wonder they're not going to do it. So a big part of the culture change aspect is making sure you're bringing it into what is expected of an engineer, showing them, like, what the priority is, giving them the tools and the education to do it, and making it part of a build. The same way you have kind of security as part of a review, as part of an assessment, a check that you would do, you should have FinOps as part of that part of the journey of building. And that is where we get the biggest success, when people know, oh, it is my job to be cost optimized, the same way as it has to be highly available. That's where the culture starts to shift, where the responsibility transitions from FinOps to engineer.
I think I generally agree with that. There's one other aspect that I've kind of discovered talking to a lot of customers over the last couple of years, which is I almost feel like there's something, just like you have technical debt in code, where there's no engineer that you'll speak to who'll say, oh, I love the debt that's in my code base, right? I feel like there needs to be a new concept of a FinOps debt, which is very analogous to the technical debt. Everyone agrees that this shouldn't be there, but it's just a question of time and priorities and the returns on the effort that you put in. And you have to weigh that all the time. Mm-hmm. And when that balance kind of tilts, that's when attention comes in. So, for example, if your revenues drop and suddenly you're not growing at an insane pace, the cost starts becoming, a factor because you have to address margins, and then you start looking at it. Similarly with code, at a point where, you need to scale up, maybe 10x or 100x, and you find that you have technical debt to a point where it will prevent you from scaling seamlessly, that's when you pay attention to it, right? So I feel like we need to start talking also about that FinOps debt, or start looking at it just like we look at code and the debt that accumulates, start looking at the infrastructure and say, that accumulates debt in pretty much the same way. And it boils down to priorities and the returns on the trade-off of what effort you're putting in and what value you'll get out of actually cleaning things up.
The FinOps debt sounds like a title of a FinOps conference talk. I like that. You should keep that one in the backlog.
Next conversation with JR. Going to be about bringing out this new concept of the FinOps debt. We will record this. We will bring this up. We are actually doing a FinOps roundtable later today at the summit. So maybe we'll bring that up as a part of the conversation.
Yeah, drop my name in and be like, the Steph's idea. No, I'm joking. No, the whole thing you're saying about technical debt, and the priority thing again is really important, because if your business's priority is to get stuff out the door, then they're going to do it in a way that's fast rather than cheap. And that's sometimes the priority. And I think that's okay sometimes, because it does depend on your company's goals and also the kind of time. So we've mentioned, I'll use Elastic IPs as a great example. Going through and manually deleting Elastic IPs, the time that your good developers will spend doing that does not probably equate to the 0.005 cents. It's probably a lot more expensive for them to go and do that. So this is where a couple of things come up. So the first one is automation. So rather than manually deleting these things, like, can you script that out? Can you use AWS config as a way to identify and attach Elastic IPs? Utilize that to kind of highlight when you can fix it. The other aspect I'm really pushing for a lot with my customers now is taking the effort away from engineers. So doing stuff for them, not in I'm doing the work, but taking the kind of additional steps away from them so they don't have to worry about it. And what I mean is things like defaults in creation of infrastructure. So if you're using CloudFormation, Terraform, like CDK, like whatever, set the defaults to things you want them to use. So GP2 to GP3 is a great example. Graviton is a great example. Tagging as needed is a good example there as well. So setting things up for success before they've even hit deploy will mean that you're not going around chasing people to go and fix something because it's already done. And then that's where we're moving into this more preventative cost optimization rather than reactive, because it's already done for you. And so if you're something I was talking about with the customer, which is they are developing Terraform modules for their organization. So they're kind of group created, people are adding it. It's what I did at my old company. We all kind of created and joined in with creating these modules that were reusable across the business. So I said to the FinOps team, go find the top 5 modules that are being used and look and see how cost optimized are they out the gate. Like for S3, are they default using intelligent tiering out the gate? Have they default put in lifecycle policies to delete multi-part uploads and delete markers and stuff like that? Have they just set all that stuff up so that, again, it's not chasing people? And once you do that, again, you fix the small stuff. You can then go fix accounts that have maybe the old infrastructure, but anything new is going to be perfect, or as perfect as it can be.
Go ahead.
I really think that engineering mindset comes down to optimizing under a set of constraints, but then it doesn't think, can I change the constraints? Can I change the environment under which I'm operating? And so what you're saying of, well, change the defaults, right? So that way they can work on the optimizing subject to the constraints, and you can change the constraints or change the situation so that they tend towards that lower cost option.
Yeah.
I think we're going to take a quick 30-second break. And we come back, I think we're going to continue from FinOps debt into FinOps smells. So situations that maybe you've encountered where it doesn't smell right. So let's take a 30-second break, and we come back, we will get into FinOps smells.
Great.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix fixers are AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost savings opportunities and doesn't just find them. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part is that it works non-stop. See for yourself. Click on the button to get a free demonstration of CloudFix and stop overspending on.
All right, great. We are back. So FinOps smells. So the idea is just like a code smell. What is when you see an account, and obviously don't use names here, but you open up an account and maybe you see no tags, or you just see one giant account, no sub accounts, just one large account, or I don't know, only one no IAM roles, just a master key that everyone's passing around. Give us.
Is that not what you're supposed to do? I just haven't. No, I'm joking.
So
You'd be surprised how many people actually still do that.
You never want my ideas on security.
Just give us some examples of maybe some FinOps smells that you've run into that you think, okay, this is indicative of an issue.
Yeah, like what's your top 3?
Oh, okay, all right. That's cloud smells. Okay, so one that jumped to mind immediately was when anyone's spending money on CloudTrail. I kind of a good example. So CloudTrail, for those who don't know, is the audit tool that you have in your accounts, and the first one you set up is free. Because we want you guys to be safe. So the first one's free, but any duplicates are paid for amount of events going through it. And what that means is if you have multiple CloudTrails, something has gone awry where what normally happens is you can set up an organization trail, which will look at your entire organization, pull that data into a linked account, and that is where your kind of main audit data sits. But what probably somebody's done is gone, oh, I think I need a CloudTrail on my account. I'll go set one up. Right. Without even considering the fact that there's a cost with it. And so we actually did that in my old company. So what would happen is the DevSecOps guys, they had their organization trail that was that main organization one. And then in our audit module that we deployed into every account, we set up a CloudTrail. And then as part of another monitoring solution, we set up a CloudTrail. So we had at least 3 in every account. And it wasn't until we started looking into FinOps and I was like, apparently this is free, but we're spending like X amount of money on it. And then we went in and we figured out that there was a bug kind of in this deep thing. And what that kind of goes back to is not only were we not necessarily wasting money, but we were spending it multiple times, was because people were deploying stuff like they should be through this module, but hadn't really checked it. And it's again, this concept of people are deploying stuff because they think they have to, and no one's really questioning it. And then secondly, not understanding what costs money in an account. So people just assumed that CloudTrail cost money because it was in the spend, but they didn't know that it was not meant, like there's not really a reason to have it. And that is where I would always say, like the FinOps practitioner person who is in charge of that kind of spend, it's their job to kind of not know about every single service, because that's very hard to do these days, but at least kind of have some of these things. So I would say that's a good first one.
I put just in the comments a link to our blog post on disabling duplicate CloudTrails, right? Because exactly what you said, the first management event is free. So I guess if you wanted to make a bunch of copies, but you could just filter it later. Right? Just take one copy of all of them and then deal with it downstream. But that requires some coordination and some communication.
Actually, I like this particular one a lot because it's binary. If there is a CloudTrail cost, you got a problem. You can go fix it pretty quickly and immediately. You should not have a line item that bills you for CloudTrail, unless you've explicitly decided that you want the duplicate and made that choice. But it's got to be explicit.
Yeah, sometimes, and I think so. One of the things I've made up as a saying is you educate and allow, or restrict and review. So you either educate teams and allow them to do anything they want, but hope the education is enough. So you give them more freedom to be more agile, innovative, but you might have a risk of cost. Or you restrict and review. So you say, no, you're not allowed to have that unless there is an edge case where you are supposed to have that. So an additional CloudTrail might be a good example of that, where you deny people creating new ones unless they really have to. But if you do that review process, there has to be a clear review process, because you don't want an engineer being like, I need to build this thing, and you're saying no, but like I'm getting told from somewhere else that I have to do it. So if you do kind of have that really restrictive policies on your accounts, have somewhere they can go to question it. But
I
yeah,
like
so
that.
that's
So educate and allow, restriction. So this is the professional way of saying forgiveness versus permission.
yeah, it's something I made up like when I first started FinOps. I was like, that sounds cool, and I still say it. A lot of the phrases I've been using for like 5 years, and then I hear other people say it, I'm like, I think that maybe you have my FinOps talk.
I have a
But
middle
yeah.
ground over here that I just want to bring up because, I mean, these are kind of two ends of the spectrum, but there's a middle ground that I have found to be pragmatic and effective across a large organization, because I struggle to kind of, in both those scenarios, it didn't work out, because if you make it too restrictive, then people can't move in an agile manner. And if it is, educate and let people do whatever, then people do whatever, and then have sprawl that's completely uncontrollable. So one of the approaches that we took was using the concept of chargeback to, I don't like to use the word induce, but to induce the behavior that you really want across the organization. And what we typically do is the behavior that we wanted. So for example, if we wanted people to use our centralized Aurora database, we would basically make that service free and subsidize it with anyone who wanted to launch their own database instance anywhere. We would just do a chargeback of 2x or 3x. And that way, the biggest driver that I found is you can align all the priorities, you can align all the people, all the different parts of the org via their budgets. So in the budget, if you suddenly find that there's this massive, tax that you're paying for using something in this bespoke manner that you decided needed to be bespoke, then you either justify it as part of your business, or you will automatically start taking measures, or the business will force you to take measures to rectify it to conform to the standards that you want across your org. So doing this punitive chargeback, if I want to call it that way, or incentivizing chargeback, you can look at it either way, that I've found to be the most effective way of giving people the flexibility when they absolutely require it, but at the same time, creating the mechanisms where they default to the standards that you want across the org.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that pushing the ownership to the account owners or the application owners is, going back to a culture conversation, is a really good way of ensuring that they pay attention to their spend, because if suddenly it's coming out of your pocket, you're way more likely to start to review and optimize the infrastructure.
So that's a good segue into the next question that I have. Who, across the organizations that you work with, who is responsible for cloud cost optimization?
Oh, I feel like there's everybody. It's everybody.
No, that's the ideal state. But who do you see today as? Who
do you see? Okay.
Like on the ground, what are the roles that you see owning this today?
Yeah. So I think of it as a couple of different personas who need to be, and this is very reflective of what's in the FinOps Foundation's capabilities and personas. I do think that I'd recommend checking out their guidance on that. I've got the book on my desk. Oh, it's behind my name. Here I've got, I think I've got 2 copies of it. I need to get the new one. The different people involved. So you have the senior leadership need to be involved. So you need to have a top-down approach, pushing like C-suite level, that FinOps and cost optimization is important. Like we said earlier, if it's not a priority, then people won't spend time on it. So if it comes from the top, people are more likely to do that. You also need to have your finance teams involved to understand where spend is coming from, help allocate costs correctly, and be involved in that. So you're not fighting a battle with them when it comes to reviewing how spend is done. Then you also need to have your engineers that we've spoken a lot about today. They need to have buy-in. They need to be invested in this. And they're the ones who are going to go on your question specifically, they're the ones that are going to optimize. Your FinOps practitioner, which is the last kind of persona that's needed, is not their job to actually make changes. I feel like sometimes that they think it is, and that could be risky because they're not the people who are day in, day out dealing with this infrastructure or with those applications. It's their job to educate and assist and give the information to those engineering teams so they make the change. They're the person that hits delete or resize or makes a change because they're the person who knows what is going on in their application, or at least they should do. So who needs to be involved? Everybody. Who makes the change? Cost the engineers, but practitioners, the people who are in charge of FinOps, and that could be a role dedicated to it. It could be a part of a CCOE. It could be someone doing it in their spare time because they're interested in it, which is how I started. Their job is to help other people do this successfully. And I think that's a kind of thing we need to remember, that, FinOps, the people shouldn't be making changes.
Got it. So talking specifically about engineers who are responsible for actually implementing all of these changes, what's your advice for how we make their lives easier?
So I think we've covered a couple of bits of that, which is like the default stuff is a big one, to take it away from their responsibility to do every single thing, like make their lives easier. This could even be things like Instance Scheduler, I think I mentioned earlier,
right,
is a great tool that a solution AWS has, which allows you to turn off EC2 and RDS instances based on tags. And why not set, if you're deploying in a dev account or a non-prod account, you just tag all your EC2s and RDSs with that kind of scheduling tag.
Right.
Just do that out the gate. Don't make them have to deploy it. Don't make them have to do any additional work. Just let it. And then if they go in the next morning and think, oh no, my application's turned off, be like, okay, well, is your application cloud ready? Because that's a conversation we need to have. We need to make sure it can handle be stateless, like you were talking about. But yeah, I think that's one thing. The other thing I would suggest is giving engineers access to their data is a really big thing. So saying to someone, you're doing a bad job at this, and then they're like, I didn't even know this was my job. I haven't seen any of this data. I don't have access to Cost Explorer. I don't have access to pricing information. I don't know what my budget is. How are they supposed to do a good job if they didn't even know they were being judged on it? And I think, again, that's something that we see a lot of is this argument of they should just do it because that's their job. And it's like, well, did you tell them it was their job? And if not, how can you? That's not really fair, is it? So with that, a couple of things I would recommend doing is when you're onboarding staff, especially engineers, educate them then. Set the practice of being the same way as when you join a new company, you probably get educated on like your badge access policies or any kind of security of your laptops or your phones. Educate them on FinOps. Say, this is what we expect. This is our tagging policy. This is our scheduling policy. This is our access policy. And then once you set that at the base, they first of all will know. And if they don't do it, you can go back and say, this is what your job is. We told you this already. This is how you'd be successful at it. That's number one, to kind of do that. The other aspect is being able to see your data. So visualizing costs is a big part of the industry. We care a lot about making sure people can see stuff. But if you give someone access to, if you're one developer and you own one application and you give them access to the entire company spend, and then they have to click around and be like, no, I just care about this account. If they say in their account, like you could save $3.36 on deleting Elastic IP, but they've already seen that the company is spending $1 million, they're like,
it
feels
like a drop in the ocean.
Yeah. But if you say, okay, well, you're spending $20 a month on your entire application, but you're wasting $3 of that on the side of resource, they're like, oh, that's quite a big, that's just over 10% of my bill. I should really delete that. And so by narrowing the scope, showing them what's relevant to them, it will make them feel more accountable for their data, but also not kind of ruin it by showing them too much. And it also means less clicks. I don't know about you, but every single time if I have to log into something and I have to click, I honestly can't bother. It takes too long. Whereas if it's just there and it's in front of me, then I'm more likely to be like, oh yeah, that's a simple way for me to see what's going on.
Yeah, one of the other challenges of a lot of the visualization tools that I see out there in the market is, one, they try to be everything for every cloud. So you've got the multi-cloud scenario. And then just with AWS alone, you have 200 plus services. Just navigating through the dashboards and through all the different services and stuff feels like you need a PhD in, the AWS service hierarchy and organization before you can actually use the dashboard. So beyond, a lot of these tools have gotten so complex that they have gotten to a point where it defeats the purpose of informing the one individual who needs to take one action. And it just becomes this massive exercise in navigation and, trying to show the biggest number so that you pretend to show value. And I think that's where we kind of lost the plot on a lot of the visualization tools that are out there right now.
Yeah, and I'll go like CID, the client intelligence dashboards. The Kudos dashboard especially is huge, right? And a lot of my customers get scared by it, and it's because the dashboards, to be fair, they're a free dashboard that you can deploy. You just pay for the QuickSight license, and they have been built from customer feedback. So a customer said, I want to see this tool, I want to see this service. How do I see that data? What's an efficient thing? So but like you said, it's grown and grown and grown over the last couple of years. The annoyance, like you said, is there's quite a lot and it could be too much. But on the flip side, you have everything. So when I work with customers on these dashboards, we kind of, like I said, narrow the scope of it. So we say, okay, let's check out. I like using the month over month tab. So if any CID fans out there, the month over month tab shows you per account, like which is the biggest up and down spend, so which is gone up in spend, which has gone down in spend, and then the same with services. And so from that, you can say, okay, well, why don't we just see what we spent the most on last month? And say you click on it and it filters, it says, oh, it was CloudWatch. We'll go back to CloudWatch. And then you can say, okay, well, who spent that money? Oh, it's this account. Okay, so let me filter by that account. Let's go into the CloudWatch tab and let's see what's going on. Immediately, you've gone from, oh my God, I'm spending money all over the place, to, I want to look at this one service. I'm going to go to this one tab. And so one thing I'd recommend for people, if they are starting out with a visibility tool and they've given it to engineers, so they've given it to finance or anybody, like it doesn't matter who, and they're not using it, is probably because they've got access, but they don't know where to start, which is what you're saying. So one thing we've started to do is provide like a scavenger hunt or like challenges or suggestive questions. So go, okay, what I want you guys to do is go figure out what was your biggest spend last month and what was your lowest spend last month. And of that, what's your top usage type? And it's just like because that's non-service specific, it's very simple. All that data is in there, but it gives them a purpose to go into that dashboard. And then once they start using it for answering those questions, they'll become more familiar with which views they like, what services they are, what languages using. And it kind of allows people to develop the skills. In all honesty, when I first started, I just used to be like, oh, there's a big dashboard. People can use it to find stuff. And I didn't know how to use it. It took me ages to be like, oh, Steph, you should really figure out how you use this dashboard efficiently. And so I spoke to a lot of people. I asked customers what they liked in it. I asked the developers who built it what they like in it, found out their favorite views, and then started to create the views that utilize the views that I like to tell a story. And so if you're shown this huge set of information, you're just never going to click on everything. So having a purpose is the best way to get someone to use a tool. Because it's like, there's that old story about salespeople, isn't there? That I'm trying to remember this, which is like when you're trying to sell a spoon, if you're just like, oh, buy this amazing spoon and all this stuff, people aren't going to buy it. But if you're like, you need something to mix, you need something to eat soup with, well, you need a spoon. So it's like solve a problem rather than just give them a solution.
Yeah. By the way, we are talking to Yuri. From the team, from the Kudos team, next week.
It's next week.
That's absolutely next week. And one of the questions, here's a preview of one of the questions that's coming up, is the thing I love about QuickSight is the QuickSight queue, where you can actually ask natural language questions. Mm-hmm. And so what if we did away with all of this and just had 5 questions that people should care about and ask that and then generate the data in using QuickSight Queue that answers that specific
That's a really
question.
good idea. So what is my largest spend category? What is what is too much? How is it divided? Is there an account that's drastically different than the other accounts?
Correct. So Steph, I'm going to nominate you to pick your top 5 questions for QuickSight Queue that you would love to build. And then we'll come up with ours, and then we will have Yuri go off and figure out how to incorporate that into the dashboard, because I think
he could build that. He'll be great, and I love Yuri. He'll be a great guest. Do you know, I actually, back when we were in lockdown, I built I should probably pipe up. I built an Alexa skill to query your custom usage report. And that I feel like I always left it, and then now it's kind of been superseded by probably ChatGPT. So I probably won't finish building that because it'll be or Q didn't exist, so won't do it then.
Well,
but yeah, I think that's good.
Of ChatGPT, we have an audience member question that we should take. This is from Sue Gooch.
That's from my mom.
Awesome. It's good to have family
Hi, Mom and
support
Dad.
on the show. How far away is an AI solution that just takes over a customer's spend and optimizes it for them?
I love this. They've not given me an easy question.
I think it's a great question.
That's a great question. They'll be very proud of that. Thanks, guys. Love you guys. It's an interesting point with ChatGPT. I mean, I started looking into it. I did ask it the top challenges of FinOps, and it gave me a very common answer recently. And I think moving towards a way in which you can optimize spend where developers don't have to do it and it's all kind of done for you is probably the future. We're looking more. And I mean, I would like to throw this question back at you guys, especially with CloudFix. Like, how do you see it integrating with your tool? Because that's going to be an interesting solution when it comes to the forefront of that technology. But I think that some of this stuff probably already exists. Like if you think about Q, like you mentioned, you are starting to be able to ask these questions, suggest it. The big challenge is going to be integrating it with all the services to make sure that a change is a good change to make. Because like we said, when I was telling the story about having an instance that was too big, but I needed to be too big, if you let an AI do this, it might not understand that at this point. So there is like a bit of a risk with it. But I think the smarter it gets, the less people are going to need people like me. But yeah, from CloudFix's point of view, yeah, exactly. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so my view is that this is a problem in dimension. So for example, at the starting tier, there are a number of fixes that are simple, straightforward, with no trade-offs involved. And when you have those, I don't think you need AI. You just need a simple rule-based system that goes ahead and implements it. A large part of what we do today in CloudFix is simple rule-based systems because they are no-brainer, things that you just should implement, and there are no trade-offs to make over there. The challenge comes when you have trade-offs to make, right? And that's where you kind of require human decision-making, like where is that threshold of my risk versus reward and so on. And I think that's where, as we go to more dimensions of how we look at, like, for example, the right sizing example we were talking about earlier, where there's so many dimensions of data that you need to look at and then make a decision about the risk and reward. I think a lot of the AI training can happen in that area where you determine certain thresholds of risk and give it some parameters for that risk and reward threshold and let it make the decisions. And I think the AI would be really useful in those kind of scenarios. But that said, I think that's going to be the future. I am still shocked as to how much of optimization scope still exists in that very basic, low-hanging fruit. Just a few weeks ago, we were in Seattle talking to folks at AWS, and I was shocked to learn that even today, the average utilization across all AWS customers for EC2 is just 6%. And that shocks me.
You mean like utilization of the box? Like
of the box?
Yeah, so if you can somehow run, HTOP on the entire on the entire EC2, it would show 8% CPU utilization on average. And then S3 is somewhat similar.
I didn't know that.
How many objects have been put in there and have never been
over 90% of the objects have never been touched more than once.
It's about object storage. Like,
tens of trillions of objects
if today, just use intelligent tiering. People, just if you're out there listening, go and do intelligent tiering now. Like, please.
Right. So there are just so many of these which are such no-brainer, simple, low-hanging fruit, and we've not even crossed that threshold. So today, when people ask me about the AI stuff, I'm like, yes, that's the future, but let's try and get to a point where let's fix the basics first, which can be accomplished by very simple rule-based systems. And then I would love the day when that's the big challenge, where we can't push further and we need the AI to be good enough to be able to make those trade-offs. But I think there's a long way to go there.
And I like the way you classify it in terms of things that are completely dead simple, like S3 intelligent tiering, which turn that on. And there's other things where you need some judgment, but it's mechanical. So that's things like Dynamo and frequent access, where you can make yourself worse off, but it's straightforward to figure out when that does and doesn't happen. But then having some higher level judgment that says, okay, this service I need to have at this level of performance. This service, you can make it as cheap as it possibly can be, as long as it works eventually. I think that kind of guidance would be neat to have from some kind of higher level AI, but like I said, there's so much to be done with the simple, straightforward stuff that the return on that isn't there yet.
Yeah.
And I think there's one other aspect, which is a computational problem, which is that when you ask most customers what they want, so let's say there's system A, system state A, and then you say, when I fix it, it'll be in state B. From a customer standpoint, they want equivalence, right? And that whole notion of equivalence is fuzzy. Like they don't want any behavior to change. They don't want any, anything to go down. They don't want, stuff to change, but the costs should come down, and bunch of other. There are certain set of parameters that should change, certain set of parameters that shouldn't, especially behavior. And determining equivalence is an NP hard problem, computationally speaking. So when you have an AI make a trade-off or a judgment saying, this is probably going to be 80% equivalent, I think we have a much higher threshold for AI and computers to work and make those kind of decisions. So I think we are a bit off from, or a bit away from getting to that state, but I think the rate at which the AI stuff is evolving every day, it's definitely very, very fascinating and interesting. I'd love to see how things evolve there.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're getting close on the time. Steph, is there any final things you'd like to say? I don't know if to say final. But for the wrapping up this live stream, any other just where should people get started?
Or always a good start is looking at your data. I think we've talked a lot about a bunch of different things today. And if you're seeing this and you're like, okay, where do I want to get involved in this FinOps thing? What should I do first? It is, for me, always look at your data, see where you're spending money, start to narrow that scope and figure out what you can change. What do you have power to change? Especially if it's your own accounts versus like an entire organization, figure out what you can do. And then once you see that data, kind of start to focus on maybe not, like we said, that EC2 spend, but what other things are there out there that you can dive into and start to optimize and start to ask the question, why is that there? I think is one of the most powerful things that you could do as any part of the FinOps world is why is that spending money, or why is it set up like that? And in simple terms as well, another thing that I would start to do is, I'm stealing this from someone from Singapore, which is be bold. So what you were talking about with those changes of the 6% of CPU is probably because people are scared to make a change, and they're scared that that instance isn't going to work. And the thing is, with a cloud, you can always put it back. You can always make a bigger one. So really try things. That is why we have dev, test, and non-production accounts, is for you to try things out. Try a different instance type size. Try a different way of looking at it. See what else you could utilize and kind of be adventurous. And the last thing I'd say is check out my Twitch show as well. I can share the guys a link to the YouTube channel. I'd say if you are interested in learning a bit more, just to get some cross-contamination of our shows, I would say just if you want to deep dive into any of the optimization recommendations that we've tapped into recently, then that's a good place to start as well.
So absolutely. Is it? Let me put the URL that you've put here. Let me put this in the comments, and let's put it on the screen for a moment so people can see that. There we go. The keys to AWS optimization. So go check out your show. And I love that you said just try things out, right? It's easy to kind of overthink. Should I switch to Graviton? Should I switch to AMD? You just try it, right? You can learn in an hour if it's going to work or not, right? Luckily, we're not buying these things physical servers. You can move your whole infrastructure to another architecture or another processor, and then move it back if it doesn't work. So just try it. I like that. Be bold when you use that. We should make a sticker of that.
Absolutely. The next summit.
Yeah, shout out to Justin if he ever sees this, who said that at the event. I'm going to use that.
That is awesome. Thank you so much once again, Steph, for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we look forward to more conversations with you on this topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Always love hearing people chat about optimization and FinOps. So yeah, looking forward to hopefully maybe seeing you guys at reInvent. That will hopefully be the next time we meet up.
We will definitely be there. So see you then. Thank you so much, Steph, again.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.